Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bert Tussing. I'm the Director for Homeland Defense and Security Issues at the United States Army War College. Delighted to be here with you today, honored to be with this particular group of people, the panel that you'll be listening to this afternoon, and the discussion that we're going to be sharing with one another. We're particularly pleased to be able to lead this off with that agency which we support in 98.9% of everything that happens within the territorial confines of the United States, the Department of Homeland Security. We are honored today to have with us Vice Admiral retired, I have to do that, sir, David P. Pekoski, the senior official performing the duties of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, like most people of his ilk, the Admiral, the senior official, wanted no introduction that goes on very long, but I will tell you that he is currently serving not only as the senior official performing the duties of Deputy Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, but also the Director of the Transportation Security Agency. He is, as you might have gathered by now, Vice Admiral from the United States Coast Guard. He was the 26th Vice Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, and he has performed as an executive in government service industries, which have led teams that provided for our help and our endurance in counterterrorism, security, and intelligence support services to government agencies. And, sir, I think that's all you want from me to say, so if you would, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Fanning, for that short introduction. I appreciate that. Having been in the audience many, many times, the last thing you want to hear is a long bio from somebody, and really it's more about where you're going than where you were, I think. And what I'd like to talk about this afternoon is where the Department of Homeland Security is going. I don't plan to talk for the full 30 minutes and would like to open this up for some Q&A towards the end. But first, let me set the stage for this multi-domain Homeland Defense segment of your annual meeting. And it looks like you have a very full agenda over the last several days and certainly in through tomorrow. So I'm hoping that I can contribute to that discussion, and I know that you have an excellent panel that follows that will keep the dialogue going. But let me begin by thanking the Department of Defense, U.S. Northern Command, and Army North for their partnership and support. Department of Homeland Security simply could not conduct our mission were it not for the support of the Department of Defense, primarily through U.S. Northern Command, and certainly in the Southwest Border Operations that we've been involved in over the past year without Army North's strong support, and we very much appreciate that. As you all know, the Army is in its 245th year, and all Americans salute you for protecting our country from its very beginning. And just yesterday, we celebrated the U.S. Navy's 244th birthday as well. I also want to specifically thank Vice Admiral Mike Dumont, who will set the stage for the panel that follows, for the support that NORTHCOM provides DHS. Now, we've had a numerous series of VTCs and civices with U.S. Northern Command. I think we've actually seen each other on a civets, but we haven't had the opportunity to see each other in person, so it's good to see you, sir. And again, thank you for your support, not just to the Southwest border, but also the defense support to civil authorities for domestic response and recovery. And just think about Hurricane Dorian and how we were able as a nation to respond and recover, helping the government of the Bahamas with Hurricane Dorian. And the capacity that you bring to the table is just capacity that's available nowhere else. And the professionalism you always bring to every operation is inspirational for certainly the people working alongside you, but also for the people that benefit most directly from your efforts. The Southwest border effort in particular, I know, required a significant reprogramming of resources kind of late in the fiscal year. We had the very same situation in the department, but speaking on behalf of the acting secretary and all of the components in DHS, we appreciate the support we have received. And I think these are perfect examples of where Homeland Security meets Homeland Defense. As you may know, DHS has a very strong culture of joint operations because approximately 25% of our employees are former military, either former military not retired or retired military. And this really enhances, I think, our ability to work alongside you, and it also allows us to benefit from the development of the joint warfare program and jointness in general that you have had over the past many years after passing of the Goldwater-Nichols Act. As you may know, we are continuing. DHS is a relatively new agency, 16 years old, and we are still developing our own capabilities and to develop truly across the department a culture of jointness. And as you know, that's just not an easy thing to do. It requires a careful look at your personnel systems, a careful look at your assignment processes, a careful look at how you develop policy and how you advocate for legislation. But we are very much in the mode of doing that. And one of the things that I hope to bring to the table during my time in the Deputy Secretary's chair is to promote that effort, because my experience in the Coast Guard, my experience working alongside each of our military services has proven to me that that is definitely the way to go. In the changing Homeland threat environment, our ongoing partnership is critical for both Homeland Defense and Homeland Security missions. Since our department is relatively new, when the strategic environment began to change, our department changed along with it. Like DoD, we recognize that the Homeland is no longer a sanctuary. As a result, we are better positioned today than ever before to work with the Department of Defense in its Homeland Defense mission. And I'd like to touch on one area where our collaboration is critical, and that is protecting our nation's critical infrastructure. Virtually all critical infrastructure systems and networks are subject to cyber and physical vulnerabilities. This has the potential to bring devastating consequences for the safety and security of the American people. To reduce the potential for penetration and damage, it is essential to practice effective cyber hygiene, including regularly patching software. And I say that, and all of us think, well, of course you have to do that. Well, I can tell you from my own experience working critical infrastructure issues over the past couple of years, that is not an of course across our nation. It's really important. If people just did that, it would greatly enhance the resiliency of our infrastructure. In addition, we need to monitor, test, and adjust physical controls and leverage the vast spectrum of resources available through DHS, DoD, and its partners. We share in the national responsibility to help protect our nation's critical infrastructure from both physical and cyber attacks. As in many of our mission spaces, DHS supports a whole-of-society approach to cyber and infrastructure security, and that is, in my view, a relatively new term, not completely well understood by everybody who hears it, but that is the term of art that the Department of Homeland Security is using from this point forward when we issue strategy documents, when we look at how we approach mission accomplishment. And the concept stands for, hey, I remember, and I'm sure many of you do as well, we first started talking about several years ago a whole of government approach. And that was good. That was better than where we were before because that implied that we were going beyond the federal government into the state, local, and tribal governments. Then we started to use the term whole of nation approach, even better. Because that included the private sector. It included community organizations and things like that. But as we look at the terrorist threat and the domestic terrorism threat, we know that we need to go a step further and go to truly whole of society. We know that, and all of you have seen, if you just read the newspaper on the threats we face here in the homeland or the actions that have already occurred in our homeland just over the past couple of years, had a member of society been able to alert some entity of a potential problem with an individual by their behavior, by their relationships, by their work habits, we might have prevented a number of incidents that have occurred across this country. And it is only by leveraging all available resources that we will be able to counter and mitigate threats to our critical infrastructure. Operating in silos, and you all know this, or closed systems, weakens all connected stakeholders involved in mitigating risks to our critical infrastructure. Resilient and secure critical infrastructure ensures the United States' ability to perform our national critical functions, including DoD's performance of their full range of critical missions, and notably DoD's ability to project power. The federal government's newest agency is CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and that is dedicated to protecting our critical infrastructure as well as preserving our ability to perform our critical functions. But to protect our critical functions, they first had to be identified. And if you think of the mental model here, we initially looked at identifying our critical infrastructure sectors across the country. That was a good first step. But as we looked at that and we looked at the infrastructure sectors, we knew that there was, no surprise, significant connectivity between them. And so we looked at this and said, hey, we really need to get to looking at national critical functions. What functions does the nation need to perform? And then having that national critical functions list, be able to prioritize what pieces of critical infrastructure we need to focus on. In April, CISA published its initial set of 55 national critical functions. So that's a significant step up from the national critical infrastructure sectors, which are about 16. And these functions focus on better understanding a holistic risk picture within or across critical infrastructure sectors. It provides a dynamic view of our nation's risk profile by identifying critical functions as well as associated subfunctions, critical entities, and critical technologies. It allows for a new way to view criticality, which is linked to a system of systems way of thinking about the resilience of our national security, economic security, and public health and safety. Simply put, this is an all-encompassing system that minimizes risk by telling us what is most important. The National Critical Functions construct allows us to increase resilience and harden systems across critical infrastructure ecosystem in a more targeted, prioritized, and strategic way. Out of these national critical functions is our ability to conduct elections, an issue which DHS and DoD partner closely on. It's certainly very much top of mind for us as we go into the 2020 election season. It is the Department of Homeland Security's mission to safeguard the American people, our homeland, and our values. And there are perhaps few more treasured national values than free and fair elections. CISA has taken an aggressive lead with Protect 2020. This campaign is designed to increase our partnership with state and local election officials who have the direct responsibility for the election infrastructure, engage campaign and political organizations, which has been ongoing for several months now and will continue apace for the next year, and enhance the general public's resilience against foreign disinformation campaigns designed to undermine our confidence in the election process. This is a harder one to get at, but it's something that we are committed, along with all of our partners in the interagency, to continuing to communicate with the public to be able to identify when disinformation is being presented. We are grateful for DoD's partnership with us in this arena, demonstrated by the Secretary of Defense's remarks at CISA's annual summit last month, when he referred to election security as an enduring DoD mission. National Level Exercise 2020, which is focused on cyber, will provide a unique opportunity to address Homeland Defense, Homeland Security, and civil support scenarios at the strategic and operational levels. Joint Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense exercises such as these play a key role in maturing our relationships. By securing our ability to perform national critical functions is just one component of Homeland Defense and Homeland Security. The other area that I'd like to talk about a little bit is the Arctic. This is where both Homeland Security and Defense share security and defense interests. The U.S. is an Arctic nation with over 2,500 miles of shoreline and an international maritime strait adjacent to the Russian Federation, an exclusive economic zone of approximately 3.4 million square miles of ocean, and 647 miles of land border with Canada above the Arctic Circle. Every DHS mission applies to our Arctic domain. In the past, the Arctic was viewed as self-policing, with conditions so harsh that they curtailed illicit activities. However, this is changing, and with the advent of new technologies, new operating conditions and new emphasis is being placed on Arctic resources. Additionally, as outlined in the 2017 National Security Strategy, other nations, including the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, have deemed the Arctic a strategic priority, and they are strategic competitors challenging American power, influence, and interests. In response, the Department of Homeland Security is developing a strategy for Arctic security. Under the strategy, we will achieve 4 primary goals. The first is establishing and maintaining functional awareness of the Arctic domain and risk environments. The second is securing and safeguarding U.S. Arctic regions, borders, and infrastructure. Third, promoting the preparedness and resilience of U.S. Arctic communities. And fourth, facilitating safe and sustainable growth of commerce and travel in the Arctic. And lastly, I'd like to pivot our discussion to the recent release of the Department of Homeland Security Strategic Framework for Countering Terrorism and Targeted Violence. The Acting Secretary released this strategy mid-September, and the framework outlines the Department's vision around the following goals. Understand the evolving terrorism and targeted violence threat environment, and support partners in the Homeland Security enterprise through the specialized knowledge. Prevent terrorists and other hostile actors from entering the United States and deny them the opportunity to exploit our nation's trade, immigration, and domestic and international travel systems, prevent terrorism and targeted violence, and enhance U.S. infrastructure protections and community preparedness. That last goal is of relevance to our Homeland Security and Homeland Defense missions, emphasizing the need to enhance our cybersecurity and infrastructure security postures. It also emphasizes the need for improving local, state, and regional capabilities to respond to a WMD attack. The framework also addresses counter-UAS, another area in which DHS and DoD must partner closely. In closing, I want to reemphasize our department's appreciation for our most valued partners in DoD in securing and defending the homeland from a wide range of threats across all domains. All of us here know threats to the homeland are persistent and pervasive, and our continued vigilance is required in our homeland security and homeland defense missions. I want to thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and I look forward to taking your questions for the remaining balance of my time. And please, any question is fair game, and I'll do my level best to answer it to the best of my knowledge. Thanks. So General Swan's going to give me the first question. All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Administrator, Mr. Secretary, for coming. Appreciate it very much. A question about the new Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency, that one of the newest arms of the department. As we look at, and General Dickinson may address this during the panel, we look more to space and how much we rely on space. Part of that is using DoD, using infrastructure in the private sector, ground-based systems linking to satellites and so forth, much of which is not protected by DoD at all. It's protected by others. How do you see the new agency complementing what DoD needs to do in space?
Yeah, the new agency is really designed in many ways to facilitate a discussion and to make sure that the right players are involved in addressing the issues that we find. There are sector-specific agencies identified for each one of the critical infrastructure sectors, and then as we look at the critical functions list, which I talked about earlier, I'm trying to prioritize amongst the critical functions list where we need to place our early effort. I'll give you one example. If I looked at the banking system, the financial services sector as an infrastructure sector, a couple of the functions that fall under that is the ability to withdraw money. And how do we protect that function being performed, which actually gets into the electrical power sector and things like that. So we're really trying to cross-cut and look across. CISA's role is to identify those issues, to provide the coordinating framework, and then to ensure that action is being taken as we go forward. And CISA, as a relatively new agency, was really a part of the Department of Homeland Security headquarters staff. It was the National Programs and Protections Directorate. We felt that it needed a different status than that to be able to do this important coordinating function. And so working with the Congress passed legislation that had it stand alone. As you know, whenever you do something like that, you get an initial set of authorities, which are, quite frankly, it takes a lot of convincing sometimes to get that initial set of authorities. But there's also generally an understanding that, hey, we're going to come back as we operate this agency for a couple of years. We're going to find some gaps in authorities as we work across the interagency, as we work with our private sector partners. And when we do, we want to have a discussion about follow-on potential legislation to close those gaps in authority. I will tell you that from what I have seen, the coordinating functions are actually working quite well because, to your point, Guy, the private sector has been very, very invested in this. And they understand the importance of having national leadership put to bear on some of these issues, and just looking for a consistent voice and a consistent message that comes out of those opportunities. Finally, we've worked really hard to ensure that our private sector partners have the adequate level of security clearance to be able to engage in a good discussion. And this really involves having folks that are in key security positions that are going to be in there for a while. So they kind of understand, as we all do, kind of how the table has been set. And when you get new information, how that new information fits into the overall context. And so we've been working at this through NPPD and now CISA for about 10 years now. And it has really matured very, very well, but there are still areas that we know we need to work on. space being certainly one of them. If we look at threats that we have now to pieces of our power grid, whether it's electrical or natural gas powered, being able to have that discussion in a classified setting is really important to being able to properly prioritize our actions. Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, sir. Colonel
Hi.
Kathy Wilkinson from Army North. I'm interested if you could talk a little bit more about the work you're doing with the election and helping to educate the public on disinformation, especially when we're entering the era of deep fakes.
Right. Well, part of it is we're putting together a strategic communications plan that's going to begin in early November. So essentially what we did was we looked at it and said, hey, we're probably going to be most effective in communications if we start a year out. If you start a year and a half or 2 years out, which we've done some communications, but really the receptivity to those messages is not as keen as it is just a year out from the election. So we're putting together a strategic communications plan across the interagency. So it's not just the Department of Homeland Security, but it's all of our partners that deal with election security and working to consistently get a message to the public. The deep fake issue and how do you believe something that you see posted on the internet are particularly difficult issues to work on. And we know just from our day-to-day lives, when you read media releases, many of us work in government. You can know what you've put out to the media in a media release, and sometimes it's characterized in quite a different way, or key elements of information, not surprisingly, aren't provided to give you the full context. And so I think it's just a persistent effort to reinforce messages and get information out there. The other part that's really important about the strategic comms plan is to instill confidence in the public that their vote counts. I think that, myself as a citizen, as a voter, I want to know when I go to the polls that my vote is my vote and that my vote actually counted in the end. And they're looking for a good, consistent message across all the government agencies. And most people know that the election process, the election infrastructure is owned by their states, because that's where they get their notice of voter registration and things like that. And so we need to do that in partnership with the state governments. We have a very, very good relationship with state secretaries of state who generally have responsibility for election infrastructure. And we've had some good partnerships, by the way, with the major social media platforms in making sure that we get information out there and them working with the states. The other thing that I would mention is, remember I said a couple of minutes ago that part of good security, good cybersecurity, and good infrastructure security is just putting patches in place for software that you run. We have seen that to be an issue with election infrastructure of some states operating on Windows 2007, for example, when 2010 is certainly a significant upgrade to that. And so just identifying where those patches are needed and helping the states along in that process. But I think there's been a pretty good messaging effort so far. You'll just see it accelerated over the next year. Thanks.
Sir, how you doing? William King. I'd like to ask you, the department stood up a countering weapons of mass destruction office a little over a year ago and then codified in December of this past year by executive order. Given that and the national strategies that have come out over the last 18 months, really highlighting the concern associated with it, can you give us a little highlights on the successes the department has had with that office, as well as the additional challenges you see in the near future?
Sure. The CWMD office, you're right, is very new, codified by the Congress. So far, it's been in its first year of standing up, and they've done some restructuring, which I think has been very beneficial. I can tell you, I'm the administrator of TSA, and before I got into this position, I saw a definite change in the focus of the CWMD office on my needs. And I can tell you that the acting secretary would say the same thing with respect to Customs and Border Protection. So it was really a focus on end results that we were looking for, and to try to put more emphasis on the CWMD mission overall. So I think, so far it's been very successful, but like anything else, we have two very critical agencies or components within the department that are very new. And my job as the person performing the duties of the deputy secretary is to make sure they have the resources and the focus to continue that stand-up. And the final thing I'd say is that and I sort of said it already when I talked about CISA, when you first stand up new agencies, it takes a while to figure out, a year, year and a half, 2 years to figure out, okay, what do I need to do to further adjust that to really get to the outcomes that I was endeavoring to get to at the very beginning. So far, I think both of them are on a really good path. Thanks. Okay.
Sir, Major General Mike Stone, Michigan National Guard. Ma'am. I'm the National Guard Association Cyber Task Force Chair, so you alluded to change in laws. So what are your legislative priorities? Where do we get more authorities for you to do your mission that you can articulate in an audience like this? I know there's a lot of policy changes being worked right now with critical infrastructure protection, but if you can maybe talk about some of your legislative goals, please.
Sure. We work very closely with the staffs and with the members up on Capitol Hill, and we work both in classified and unclassified settings to talk about what we're doing and the challenges that we face with critical infrastructure protection, and certainly in the cyber realm. One of the things that we're participating in robustly is the cyberspace solarium that's currently underway, established by an act of Congress, 14 members of the solarium, to kind of look at our national cybersecurity strategy, of which an examination of roles and responsibilities is going to be a key part of that. I happen to be one of the commissioners by position on that solarium, and the director of CISA is also a key member supporting the staff effort to get their work over the next several months to a place where the commissioners can really look at what we need to do. But I really think that's perhaps the most important thing to do, is to basically come up to 40,000 feet and kind of look at overall national authorities, national coordination bodies, national effort, national lines of strategic effort. Once we have that in place, then we'll underlay that against what CISA is currently authorized to do, and it will be able to pretty clearly show us not just where CISA needs additional authorities, but where other elements of the federal government need additional authorities. Part of this, too, is that, in my view, and one of the things that I put a lot of time on in my current position is understanding even more the cybersecurity challenges that we face and being a lot more conversational on those than I was just 6 months ago. I think my advice to any leader in any organization is if you're in the mode of saying, when a cybersecurity discussion comes up, of saying, oh yeah, I need to change my password in my email account, that's not where we need to be as leaders overall. And so, part of this overall effort is just to educate the top leadership on what the real challenges are and where some of the authorities are that we need to provide. There's always a hesitancy until we can really establish the case to provide them, but I certainly see a receptivity in the conversations we had in the solarium. Okay, I think my time is up. Hey, thank you all very much. It was a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. Wish you all the best with this excellent panel that's coming up right after me. Thanks.
I don't think we could have had a better stage setter for the discussion that's about to take place, or a better group of people to execute that discussion. Especially since the release of the National Defense Strategy, we have given frequent voice to acknowledging the fact, as you heard already from the Admiral this morning, that the Homeland is no longer a sanctuary. If war were to come against a peer or a near-peer adversary, we would have to expect that there would be both physical and virtual repercussions against the people of the United States within the territorial confines of the United States. These attacks will challenge all of our domains. In preparing for and responding to the same, we must plan on, as necessary, reversing what we have all come to think of as the DISCA paradigm, where DoD is consistently in support of the lead federal agencies outside of the Department of Defense. DoD will become the lead federal agency. Others must rethink and perhaps even reconfigure in order to provide the department with the wherewithal to defeat the nation's adversaries. State, local, tribal, and territorial governments and the private sector may become part of the efforts to secure the department's installations, to ensure the department's ability to get our forces to deploy against our enemies, and a host of other issues to sustain our ability to defend the homeland. What you see before you today with this panel are the people who are more than any others in charge of the response that will have to take place in order for those things to be brought about. First speaking today will be Vice Admiral Michael J. DeMont, the Deputy Commander of the United States Northern Command. I would like to point out that the Vice Admiral's service to this country came upon his graduation from Southern Maine when he was commissioned, yes, a second lieutenant in the United States Army.
That's right.
He served for 5 years on active duty as an Army aviator and a paratrooper for the 82nd Airborne Division. Since that time, he has gone on to other things.
All-American.
He has held 5 commands, including the Joint Reserve Unit of the United States Military Delegation to NATO's Military Committee in Brussels. He served as a special assistant to the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. He served as Chief of Staff in the Office of the United States Defense Representative to Pakistan. As an SES, he served in the Office of the Secretary of Defense as the Principal Director for Special Operations and Counterterrorism. And as an SES, he served as Defense Policy Advisor to SACEUR. As he commented several times outside with some of his friends, the man cannot hold a job. In addition to the education that you would expect would sustain someone on all those responsibilities, he has his Master's of Science degree in Strategic Studies from the United States Army War College, which explains the glow. After the Admiral, we have Ms. Teresa Whalen, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security. Ms. Whalen has served 3 different times in the Department of the Undersecretary of Policy as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. First, for Homeland Defense Domains and Defense Support to Civil Authorities. Second, as Defense Continuity and Crisis Management Deputy Assistant Secretary. And finally, most recently, as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for African Affairs. Before she took on her present duty, she performed the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. She has served as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict and has served on the as a National Intelligence Officer for Africa on the Director for National Intelligence's National Intelligence Council. Following Ms. Whalen, Lieutenant General Laura Richardson, the Commander of Army North, who has done what you would expect our commanders to do. She has commanded at platoon level, company level, battalion level. She has served as the Director for the Army's Transformation Office. She has served as Garrison Commander for Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. She has served as the Army's liaison to the United States Senate. And as a general officer, she has served first as Commanding General of the Army's Operations Test Command, the Deputy Commander General of the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood, the Chief of Army Legislative Affairs, Deputy Commanding General of the United States Forces Command prior to her current position. Following General Richardson, we will hear from Lieutenant General James H. Dickinson, the Commander of the United States Army Space and Missile Defense Command. Like General Richardson, he has commanded in every level that you would expect, from platoon commander to commanding general of an Army Air and Missile Defense Command system. He served as the Chief of Staff of the United States Strategic Command, the Director for Test and Missile Defense Agency at Redstone Arsenal, and he too, as you can tell from the degree and from the glow, is a graduate of the United States Army War College. And finally today, we will hear from Major General Stephen Hager, the Deputy Commander of the Cyber National Mission Force of the United States Cyber Command. He served as platoon leader and executive officer for Alpha Company from 742nd Military Intelligence Battalion, served in Operation Desert Storm, served in Operation Restore Hope, served on the National Security Agency as a senior electrical engineer in the Microelectronics Advanced Research Group. I will tell you, as an English Lit major from the Citadel, I am impressed, sir. He was mobilized in 2013, where he deployed to Afghanistan as a deputy commander for the 335th Signal Command. He served as Deputy Commanding General for the 335th Signal Command. And in his civilian career, in all his off-duty time, he developed software for technology companies in Silicon Valley. And with that, Admiral DeMont.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you. I've been asked to speak for about 10 minutes to briefly outline the topic of multi-domain homeland defense from the NORTHCOM perspective and set the stage for our follow-on discussion. I'll briefly summarize how we view the current threats and what we are doing about it to ensure we present a credible defense to deter potential adversaries. At the headquarters of both NORAD and U.S. Northcom, our two staffs are driven by a single unyielding priority, and that is defending North America from attack. Next slide, please. Since World War II, our power projection capabilities and technological overmatch have allowed us to fight forward, focusing on conducting military operations overseas. However, since 2001, a large portion of our attention has been dedicated to understanding, countering, and fighting terrorism and small regional conflicts. While we were focused on those efforts, nation-state adversaries studied our way of war. They've invested in capabilities to offset our strengths while exploiting our weaknesses. And they've demonstrated patterns of behavior that indicate they have the capability, the capacity, and the intent to pose significant risk to us below the threshold of nuclear war. For many years, the two oceans on either side of us served as protective moats, and the remote expanse of the Arctic above us has been a significant defensive barrier to both the United States and to Canada. But given modern technological advancements, those two oceans are now avenues of attack, and the Arctic is now an avenue of approach. We have to account for these attack vectors as we protect against modern threats. The revisionist powers of both Russia and China have altered global strategic dynamics, and they've done so by fielding advanced long-range conventional weapon systems. They've also been undertaking increasingly aggressive efforts to acquire new technologies and to expand their global military presence and influence, including in the approaches to the United States and Canada. Russia continues to hone and flex its offensive cyber capabilities and its new generation of air and sea-launched cruise missiles that possess significantly greater standoff ranges, reduced radar cross-sections, and much improved accuracy than their predecessors, allowing them to strike North America from well outside NORAD's radar coverage areas. Along those lines, Russia has introduced the Severodvinsk-class guided missile submarine. This boat is armed with advanced land attack cruise missiles and is much quieter and more lethal than previous generations of Russian attack submarines. Russia's fielding of advanced long-range cruise missiles capable of flying through the northern approaches and striking targets in North America has emerged as a dominant military threat from the Arctic, while diminished sea ice and the potential for competition over both resources and access present overlapping challenges in this strategically significant region. Finally, Russia is developing multiple weapon systems specifically designed to circumvent our missile defenses and hold North America at risk. This effort includes the ICBM-delivered Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle. This weapon is likely to become operational in the next few years, further complicating our missile warning mission. Similarly, Chinese officials have stated China is not content to remain a mere observer in the growing competition, proclaiming itself a near Arctic state. To this end, it has taken steps to normalize its naval and commercial presence in the region and increase its access to lucrative resources and shipping routes. Next slide, please. The erosion of our military advantage vis-a-vis China and Russia is undermining our ability to detect threats, defeat potential attacks, and deter future aggression against North America. This is emboldening both competitors and adversaries to challenge us at home, holding at risk our people, our critical infrastructure, and our ability to project military power at the time and place of our choosing. Given technological advancements, rising tensions, and the potential for miscalculation, we must anticipate attacks against our critical infrastructure in the event of a conflict. As a result, it is important for us to recognize the homeland is not a sanctuary. We must have a globally integrated approach to these threats, as outlined here, if we are going to mount a credible defense and deterrence of near-peer adversaries. Next slide. Deterrence based on cost imposition, as with nuclear deterrence, is likely insufficient to fully deter conventional standoff attacks, and adversary incentives for a non-nuclear strategic attack may well be growing. A capable defense of the homeland is the foundation of effective deterrence and complements, not competes with, our other global priorities, both now and in the future. It is important to recognize we cannot deter what we cannot defeat, and we cannot defeat what we cannot detect. A capable defense at home is a prerequisite to both a credible deterrent against conventional attack and our ability to project power to a forward fight. To maintain a capable defense, it's necessary for us to aggressively pursue four enduring conditions that serve as guideposts and drive our efforts at both NORAD and Northcom. The first is to deter aggression and defeat attacks. Secondly, to maintain our competitive military advantage. Third is to develop and strengthen partnerships. And fourth is to provide rapid, flexible responses to civilian authorities. These four enduring conditions offer broadly constructed strategic aims against which we must constantly assess and identify risk and vulnerabilities. Because the nature of Homeland Defense is not conducive to achieving an end state in the typical sense, the enduring conditions allow us to continually evaluate the efficacy of operational planning and execution to ensure our efforts, our priorities, and our resourcing are addressing the top priority that we have. Next slide, please. Redesigning our Homeland Defense ecosystem is essential to the operations we face. The environment requires innovative capabilities to deter, detect, and defeat advanced threats to North America, including the ability to effectively operate in the Arctic. A capable defense here at home demands we incorporate technological advancements as they become available. We must seek new ways of employing old capabilities, or as we say, the new old, and rapidly develop new capabilities that open the door to even more novel operational approaches, what we call the new. To accomplish this, we need to leverage emerging commercial technologies to provide leap-forward capability, including edge computing, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. To counter these new and emerging threats, we've got to field a layered intuitive sensing grid for domain awareness, utilize an adaptive integrated architecture to enable joint command and control across all domains, and employ advanced defeat mechanisms for cruise missiles, hypersonic glide missiles, and the platforms that carry them. We need a capable defense in order to present a credible deterrent, one that protects our critical infrastructure and preserves our ability to project power abroad, again, at the time and place of our choosing. Let's take a quick look at each of these three essential elements. Next slide, please. In order to increase our domain awareness, we need a layered intuitive sensing grid capable of detecting, tracking, and discriminating missile threats at the maximum ranges possible in order to drive down response time for decision makers and create decision space for our national leaders. Additionally, we need improvements in our ability to detect and track aircraft, ships, and submarines. Given technological advancements, a robust and resilient space layer is necessary to provide the earliest detection and warning against airborne threats. This integrated architecture will enable joint command and control across all domains, enhance our global awareness, and link our defeat mechanisms to respond timely and effectively. The good news is that this technology already exists. Next slide, please. Joint command and control across all domains is a necessity in the modern era of transregional, all-domain, multifunctional threats. We've got to move away from the stovepipe transmissions of data and insist upon the development of a robust communications architecture that better enables Homeland Defense. Beyond the technological aspects, we need the right mix of people, processes, pathways, and products that constitute the critical path for orchestrating a complex blend of kinetic and non-kinetic operations in the contemporary battle space. Increasingly, commanders will need to integrate capabilities they do not formally control, but upon which success depends. Additionally, emerging technologies will accelerate the need for decisions at machine speed, changing the character of how leaders set parameters, accept risk, and drive action. Given the cross-AOR avenues of approach to the nation, the increasing ability of platforms to launch missiles at very long ranges and very high speeds, and the limited number of defense assets in air, land, maritime space, cyberspace, and EMS domains, the imperative to synchronize operations across regional boundaries will continue to increase. To that end, it is necessary for us to build trust and exercise as a government and rehearse procedures to share awareness, smoothly transition control across seams, and integrate operations with a variety of non-military mission partners. Next slide, please. Lastly, we have to flip the cost curve with respect to our defeat mechanisms. Right now, our defenses are high cost, and this prevents us from having enough inventory to effectively defend through what could be sustained operations. In short, we have a tremendous opportunity to revolutionize our defeat mechanisms. For example, we need to develop low-cost interceptors, ones that would allow us to build a deep magazine and establish a high rate of fire. We also need to look at a range of non-kinetic as well as directed energy weapons that can enhance our defeat mechanisms. And finally, we have a great opportunity to partner with the private sector and take advantage of modern technologies to help build our C2 and domain awareness capabilities by use of currently existing low Earth orbit satellites. Next slide. C2 and domain awareness are not regional issues. What we're talking about is building a common global picture that relies on inputs from across the force and the interagency and supports information flow to everyone who requires it. We believe the time for discussing and miring the problem is over. At our headquarters, we're moving out with testing and prototype advanced capabilities, including persistent domain awareness, an intuitive sensing grid, and advanced battle management capabilities to enhance our Homeland Defense mission. This is not a 2030 or a 2050 problem to solve. This is a problem we are getting after today with emerging technologies and new approaches. We are taking steps to maintain our competitive advantage against peer adversaries, and we are moving out on this. Next slide. In closing, our efforts at NORAD and NORTHCOM center around sharpening our focus on a single overarching priority to defend North America. This single priority drives unity of effort in our headquarters and extends across DoD. We must be demanding customers of our commercial partners, leaders in innovation, and not cede ground to our adversaries, whether now or in the future. Investing in a credible Homeland Defense architecture creates better options and greater decision space for our national leaders during periods of competition and all phases of potential conflict. We have to transform our weapons, our systems, and our way of thinking in order to maintain our competitive military advantage. This entails improving our layered Homeland Defense, driving Homeland Defense as a foundation of national security, globally integrating Homeland Defense planning and operations, and developing new and strengthening existing partnerships, both here and abroad. We need to recognize our Homeland Defense issues require a more collective and a more integrated effort than we've taken in the past. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion with my colleagues.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we've got a great setup from Secretary Pekoski and Vice Admiral Dumont, and in terms of giving us a broad overview of the challenges that we face. And what I'm going to do is, well, Vice Admiral Dumont highlighted the new threats that the Homeland faces in the conventional arena. I want to focus on a more unconventional and even insidious threat that our adversaries pose in what we now call the gray zone, or in other words, the space between our traditional concepts of peace, a peaceful state of affairs, and full-scale war. The gray zone is a pretty busy place these days because our adversaries see it as the space where they can achieve their national objectives without triggering full-scale conflict with us. We've seen, actually, the Russians exploit the gray zone in Ukraine. I think that's just that's a teaser. That's on the highlight reels. Our adversaries really don't have any interest in confronting us on the battlefield. They know what that means for them. What they want to do is they want to defeat us by trying to make sure that we don't even get to the battlefield. It's Sun Tzu. They wrote the book. We've read the book. We know what they're about. As the former DNI, Mr. Coates, stated during his January 2019 testimony before the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, we know that our near-peer adversaries have the intent and the ability to hold our critical infrastructure at risk non-kinetically, which is why I say it's insidious. This really makes the homeland the new front line, which is a huge change in mindset that we have to make for ourselves. We are aware of the risk, and we are taking steps to improve the resiliency that we have, our capacity to operate in contested environments, starting here at home, but there's a lot more work that we really need to do. We can't do this alone. I think, as Secretary Pekoski made clear, this is a whole of society effort. And again, something that we're really not used to here in the United States. So it's going to take a fundamental change in our mindset. But similarly, we in the department can't just say, that's the other guy's problem. That's DHS's problem. That's DOT's problem. That's the states. That's it. They need to take care of that. It isn't going to work that way. We should not be so naive as to assume that even if they take on these challenges, and as the Secretary noted, they are preparing to, but that somehow we're going to be able to build an impregnable fortress in the United States. Remember the Maginot Line and how well that worked. So while we need to work with our partners to address the defensive requirements, we really also need to think as a department how we change the way that we do business. You know, if you think about it, for the last 20 years, since the end of the Cold War, our focus has really been on increasing our efficiencies and our effectiveness, our cost effectiveness, by outsourcing to defense logistics, our defense logistics to the private sector, by opening up our networks to improve collaboration with industry partners, and by increasingly relying entirely on civilian infrastructure to support our capacity to surge forward in a crisis. We've also pulled back a considerable amount of our Cold War force structure to CONUS, again, for efficiency's sake. But while we've been focused for the last 20 years on coming up with exquisite ways to project force quickly in order to respond to non-state actor threats, our near-peer competitors have been studying our way of war, and they figured out a way in their minds to optimize their approach to target our critical dependencies. As I said, we know that China and Russia have the ability to cause disruptive effects on our critical infrastructure. And during a conflict, or actually prior to an actual conflict, we really have to anticipate attacks against our critical government infrastructure, our defense infrastructures, our economic infrastructures, that the enemy hopes will narrow our decision space, limit our retaliatory options, and challenge the will of the American people to fight and to win. So Homeland Defense these days is really much more than counterterrorism. That's the way we've looked at Homeland Defense for the last 2 decades, for good reason, obviously. But addressing the near-peer challenge is going to require work at home, and that work at home is essential to maintain stability throughout what the 2018 National Defense Strategy called our long-term strategic competition with near-peer competitors. It's dangerous for us, but also for them, to have the impression, our adversaries to have the impression that they can deter us by disrupting us here in the homeland. So, as a department, we have a responsibility and a need to work with other departments and with the whole of society that Secretary Pekovsky talked about to try to improve our defensive posture here in the homeland domestically. But we also have an equal responsibility to be prepared to operate in a degraded CONUS environment. And we need to prepare ourselves by rethinking how we do our planning, how we develop our capabilities domestically, and also how we train. We train as we fight. I'll leave it there, wait for your questions. Thanks very much.
Okay, all right, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for this Homeland Security Seminar this afternoon. I'm Joan Richardson, as Dr. Tussing said, and I'm the commander of U.S. Army North 5th Army out of San Antonio, just in case you don't know where that is. And our #1 priority is Homeland Defense, just like it is for our higher headquarters, U.S. Northern Command. We serve as the nation's theater army, and filling both the role of Army Service Component Command as well as being designated NORTHCOM Standing Joint Force Land Component Command. In our theater army capacity, we set the theater and we set the conditions for operational and tactical convergence of capabilities across all domains in order to deter and defeat adversaries and defend the homeland. There are a number of key functions that we do perform as both a ASCC and also a JFLC. As a JFLC, we receive and prepare forces and we provide immediate response. As an ASCC, we set the theater by assessing threats, conducting specialized training and exercises, providing communications, and providing sustainment to land forces. The Army has assigned and allocated forces that enable us to accomplish this mission. We have a Theater Air and Missile Defense Command. We have a Theater Military Intelligence Brigade. We have a lot of sustainment. We have a theater sustainment command, an expeditionary sustainment command, and also a sustainment brigade, as well as an expeditionary signal battalion. We also have an allocated quick reaction force and rapid reaction force that can conduct no-notice homeland defense missions. Army North serves as the principal military headquarters for all land domain operations to defend the homeland within the NORTHCOM area of responsibility. It's really important that we engage effectively in the competition phase to deter escalation, deny encroachment, and defeat adversary destabilization efforts. These actions in the homeland and the NORTHCOM AOR expand the competitive space for policymakers to achieve their national objectives. In this capacity, we collaborate with joint, interagency, and international military partners to achieve protection in depth across the globe within the approaches to the homeland as well as inside the nation's borders. Our headquarters also has 4 deployable command and control packages, allowing us to operate in support of multiple missions supporting homeland defense. One mission that supports both homeland security and homeland defense is the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear enterprise. Army North is responsible for training and certifying of the 18,000 men and women who make up this critical capability for use in the homeland and potentially in support of operations overseas. This includes state and regional CBRN response forces that remain under the governor's control. On the federal side, we have operational control of Joint Task Force Civil Support, which commands the Defense CBRN Response Force. This DSURF, as we call it, provides technical search and rescue, mass casualty decontamination, medical, aviation, communications, engineering, and logistics. Our federal CBRN response forces also include two reserve component CBRN command and control elements. We focus on both the northern and the southern land approaches to the homeland. In the north, the melting sea ice in the Arctic has created competition by opening access to valuable resources that could threaten northern land approaches and create contested space. During the NORAD NORTHCOM annual Vigilant Shield training exercise, which we are in the middle of right now actually, we rehearse the deployment of air and missile defense forces, including deployment to the high north. We must be ready to operate in the Arctic to deter and defeat threats to the homeland. Winterization of equipment and extreme cold weather training prior to deployment are critical to mission success and reduce mission degradation. That means investing in modernization of our capabilities, training, equipment, communications, weapon systems, and logistics. Our interoperability with our Canadian Army partners is also critical to building capacity and expanding the range of options. Along the southern border, our Joint Task Force North provides support to federal law enforcement to counter transnational organized crime. Since October of 2018, our North has provided command and control for Title X forces to support Department of Defense approved missions in response to requests for assistance from the Department of Homeland Security. Securing the southern approach is also enabled by our many efforts to build and sustain capability with the Mexican Army. To this end, we conduct bilateral exercises, provide mobile training teams, conduct subject matter expert exchanges, and provide support to foreign military sales. Our routine engagement with our Mexican Army partners builds trust and helps to defeat adversary attempts to destabilize the region. Army North also has administrative control of the air and missile defense forces defending the National Capital Region as part of Operation Noble Eagle. As part of our force protection responsibilities, we also have tactical control for force protection of all Title X Army personnel and installations in CONUS, and we set and elevate the force protection condition level as appropriate based on threat assessments. Our homeland defense responsibilities under several COM plans include providing theater, air, and missile defense forces to the Combined Force Air Component Command, CFAC, defense of critical infrastructure, for example, key ports of embarkation and debarkation necessary for power projection, and response for a variety of contingencies, CBRN, cyber, and conventional incidences. Our response capabilities are leveraged in support of multi-domain operations, maintaining the competitive space, and prepared to surge war-winning forces to defend the U.S. homeland. Thanks so much for coming out today. Really appreciate it and look forward to your Q&A. Thank you.
Sir.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Jack.
Good afternoon. All right, there we go. There we go. Thanks for the kind introduction. I never have been introduced as an Army War College graduate with a certain glow. So I'll see if I can generate a glow under these lights. But Laura, thanks for having me on the panel today. It's always a thrill and an honor for me to get the opportunity to talk about space and air and missile defense. And so for a few minutes here, I'm going to talk about both of those. And one, I'm going to talk as the commander of Space and Missile Defense Command out of Huntsville, Alabama, not from Texas. But maybe a Roll Tide in here might be appropriate. Roll Tide. I knew I'd get it from right here. Joe, thanks for that. James, thanks for that. And then I'm going to provide you a little bit of perspective as my role as the Chief's Air and Missile Defense and Space Officer. So I thought Laura did a good job in terms of kind of laying it out. I'm going to expand a little bit on that and tell you a little bit about what Space and Missile Defense Command does. So we really support the Army and the Joint Force with capability and force development and operations in missile defense, space, and high altitude, or a better term, maybe near space. Our 1st Space Brigade, our 100th GMD Brigade, and our U.S. Army Satellite Operations Brigade all directly support Homeland Defense. Space and Missile Defense Command supports both the United States Strategic Command as well as United States Space Command. So slide, please. So the first slide there, main area I want to talk about is ballistic missile defense. We are the force provider, Space and Missile Defense Command, of the 100th GMD Missile Defense Brigade. This brigade is dedicated to the defense of our homeland and really is an amazing group of soldiers that are a multi-compo brigade in terms of having National Guardsmen from Colorado, Alaska, as well as California National Guardsmen coming together to form a nucleus in order to perform this critical mission. Their missile defense crews, as you can imagine, maintain an extremely high level of readiness, partly by carrying out their real-world missions during tests. Examples include, and you can see them in the middle of that chart, are 3 tests that I'll mention. Examples, 2016, we tested the GMD CTV-02+, which is a mouthful, when we launched a GBI for an exo-atmospheric kill vehicle thruster test. FTG 15, in May of 2017 included the first exo-atmospheric intercept of an ICBM class target. The ICBM representative target was launched from the Kwajalein Atoll Reagan test site, which is also operated by SMDC. In March of this year was probably the biggest test we've had, which is FTG-11, was a successful salvo of 2 GBIs, or ground-based interceptors. The first GBI intercepted the target, and the second GBI took out the most threat representative target in a very complex debris scene. So as I mentioned these tests, you can see on the charts, you can see contrails and et cetera. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, the second picture from the left there shows a couple of contrails, which are the 2 GBIs being launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base. The picture right to the left of that is the target being launched out of Kwajalein Atoll. The significance of these tests is it shows a tremendous deterrent capability for our adversaries or potential adversaries. And the importance of these tests are that, one, they are developmental and they're operational in the sense that we have actual crews from the 100th and the 49th GMD Brigade performing their actual missions, exercising their actual TTPs, and the performance of these tests, which measure and also ensure that we have the highest level of readiness. Slide, please. General Richardson mentioned just a moment ago, so the Army also has the air defense portion of the NORAD's Homeland Defense mission for the National Capital Region. National Guard units from South Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Mississippi, and North Dakota rotate through the NCR for this mission. This joint mission has a variety of multi-domain aspects to include the sensors and the command and control networks. SMDC supports these missions with joint systems integration and communications infrastructure that links the components into the NORAD command and control structure. So the soldiers I talked about on the first slide, the 100th, as well as these soldiers that are rotating through the National Capital Region, are doing their mission every day, even as we sit here, and have done it for more than a decade with absolute precision. So it's important to understand, in my mind, that that is a tremendous deterrent capability for the defense of our homeland. Slide, please. So the Army also extensively uses space-enabled capabilities like geospatial imagery, GPS, and SATCOM. And as we support civil authorities in response operations, SMDC develops and operates a number of these capabilities. One example in particular is the Domestic Operations Awareness and Assessment Response Tool, or affectionately known as the DART, which we developed for the National Guard. It's an interactive web environment for responders from any agency to be able to add all types of data layers and communicate. DART has been used in numerous disaster response operations, including wildfires and hurricanes, such as the recent Hurricane Dorian. SMDC also developed the flyaway packages you see on this chart to provide essential communications and essential situational awareness capabilities when commercial communications are not available. Finally, SMDC operates the Force Tracking Mission Management Center in support of U.S. Spacecom. It provides continuous friendly force tracking to support geographic combatant commands, services, non-DoD agencies, allies, and coalition partners. Force tracking is a critical tool for providing near real-time location and status of first responders and security forces on the ground or in the air. The examples on the right show the locations of firefighters and satellite-based fire detection from the massive 2017 wildfires in California. We also process tracking data for Hurricane Hunter aircraft and other users like FEMA mobile units, National Guard security patrols, and police and emergency personnel. Slide, please. And finally, Mike mentioned this just a bit, but I'm going to expand on it. I want to talk a little bit about our strategic view for the future with regard to missile defense. The Missile Defense Review noted the need for space-based sensors, interoperability, and a more balanced capability set. The graphic on the lower left shows that many of our investments address active defense in the mid-course and terminal phases, where solutions are very costly and the risk is high. We need to strengthen and integrate other elements, including defeating adversary missile systems left of launch or before they launch. In March, we completed the Army Air Missile Defense 2028, the vision for the Army Air Missile Defense enterprise for the future. This vision will be realized with multi-domain solutions consisting of guns, missiles, electronic warfare, cyber, space, and directed energy, with an expanding threat set ranging from ICBMs and cruise missiles to unmanned aerial systems. There is no silver bullet. So we need to strive for a balance in funding, including left of launch and left-right integration of capabilities. Our future architectures will be layered, tiered, and integrated using space, cyber, electronic warfare, land and air sensors, and the ability to match the best sensor with the best shooter. So to sum it up, as the Army and the DoD develop more integrated and interoperable capabilities for our global mission set, Homeland security missions remain our #1 priority. Thank you.
Please, sir.
All right, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Ma'am, thanks for having me on the panel. I'm always excited to talk about cyber because I know cyber is such an exciting thing to talk about with all the things going on here at Homeland. So I am the MA to the Commander of U.S. Cybercom, and I'm also dual-hatted as the Deputy Commander of Operations for the Cyber National Mission Force. So U.S. Cybercom is located at Fort Meade, Maryland. The Commander of U.S. Cybercom is also dual-hatted as the Director of the National Security Agency. So there's a little bit of confusion out there about Army Cyber versus U.S. Cybercom, so I work at U.S. Cyber Command. So the first thing I want to talk about is the DoD cyber strategy. So first, as the junior general on the panel here, I just have one slide with 3 main points, and I'll try to get through those very quickly. So the DoD strategy is defend forward in cyberspace, and that's very similar to the other warfighting domains, right? So in cyberspace, we want to be as close to the adversary that's causing trouble to us in the homeland. And so our intent is to be as forward deployed as possible in cyberspace to stop the actor before they can get to our borders. And when we think about cyberspace, we have a concept of what we call blue space, which is basically domestic IP space, where we have a different set of authorities. And then there's red space, which is the enemy's IP space or territory. And then there's everything in between, and we call that kind of gray space, right? So the traditional malicious cyber actor starts out in their home country. They'll go into Europe, Asia, South America, and they'll co-opt some infrastructure, and they'll obfuscate how they operate, and then they'll proceed to do their either exfiltration, their attack, they'll into the U.S. domestic space, right? And so we talked about the authorities that we have in blue space versus red space. The DoD authorities are generally authorized outside of the domestic blue space. So that's why the concept of defend forward is how we're implementing the latest strategy. So with defend forward, when I am forward deployed in cyberspace, doesn't mean that I actually have operators sitting in Eastern Europe or Indo-PACOM on the keyboard doing things. We're putting our sensors and our methodologies out there, and they could be forward deployed, or they could be actually back in the homeland doing these operations. Because when you think about cyberspace, right, it's just a couple of milliseconds and the terrain has changed. And the thing that's different about cyberspace is when we're operating, that terrain or that capability that we have could be gone in an instance, right? And so that's what's unique about cyberspace. So when we do our defend forward strategy, we obviously have to work with our interagency partners, right? And so DHS gave a great overview of the challenges that they have, helping to control everything within our blue space. So the mantra we like to say is DoD defends forward, DHS protects the homeland, and then the sector-specific agency, along with the asset owner, will actually secure their assets or secure their network. So defend, protect, secure. And with that methodology, we work closely with the interagency, right? So that's kind of the first concept that I have to talk about the DoD strategy. The next concept is Cybercom's persistent engagement strategy. And I have a little more detailed notes on this. So the intensity of great power competition cannot really be overstated. The consequences of threats to our nation in and through cyberspace have increased since the concept of building a cyber force or US Cybercom. So a decade ago, it was very plausible to train and posture our cyber forces just like any other traditional military force to prevail in future war. However, the challenges of today are that our adversaries are competing with us without triggering the all-out war, and they're achieving their national objectives, as denoted before by some of our panelists. So while this competition is occurring across many domains of conflict, cyberspace is unique. The barriers to entry for other nations and organizations are very low, and the capabilities that they can acquire are relatively cheap or inexpensive. So the cyber domain features global interconnectivity and continuous contact. The oceans that provide us the security in the other domains from an attack are not the same in cyberspace. So our physical geographic locations just don't matter as much anymore, while our authorities still are very much based on our physical geographies. And so we must adapt the cyber force to not only gain access to targets in case of war, but also to persistently engage our adversaries in competition now below the levels of armed conflict. So this allows US Cybercom to rapidly observe, react, and train to the changes that our adversaries may take with their tradecraft and their TTPs, which hopefully will reduce the risk to a strategic surprise. So when I talk about persistent engagement, let me talk about those two things. The emphasis of persistence acknowledges that we will not degrade our adversaries' cyber tools and tactics with any one single strike, nor will our adversaries retreat when they face their first set of friction in the cyber domain. Instead, we must view every mission, from baseline surveillance and reconnaissance to information operations and cyber effects that deny, degrade, disrupt, or manipulate, and every type of operation in between, as a unique opportunity to generate more and more opportunities to contest how our adversaries operate and how we will fight and maintain overmatch on them. When we operate persistently, we often generate new options to do just that. Opportunities in cyberspace are often fleeting and the environment is dynamically changing. So today an access exists, tomorrow it's gone. A successful cyber force must continually engage to seek advantages and generate these opportunities. So the emphasis on engagement recognizes that cybercom must challenge our adversaries today. We must contest our adversaries in the manner that challenge us by maintaining the cyber superiority that we now seek to prevail. Our forces must be postured to deliver cyber effects that degrade how our adversaries compete, how they decide to compete, and otherwise prosecute their campaigns short of conventional war. So when we talk about persistent engagement, this is the concept of how we're going to engage our adversary every day. And we think about that in two manners. We will act or we will enable. And most of the time, we will enable. And when we say enable, we will enable other government agencies, other host nations, and even folks in industry. Because if you think about the cyber domain, most of it is controlled by the private sector. So when we want to enable, we're often enabling the folks at DHS or even the FBI when it comes to things that we're going to do domestically. Because in cyberspace, it's more than just the ones and zeros or the malware or the types of intrusion sets that we may block. There are other legal actions we can take to impose costs on our adversaries. And so when we talk about persistent engagement, we're constantly thinking about what are those TTPs that we can do along with our partners to advance our capabilities and impose costs on our adversaries. And the last thing I want to talk about is incident response. So incident response is something that we would like to get ahead of, right? We'd like to be able to stop the adversary before they come into our blue space and cause a catastrophic cyber event. So on the DODIN, we have all the authorities that we need, right? So the DoD Information Network, we can do what we need if an adversary gets in to block them, to kick them out, and take actions to make sure they can't get back in again. When it comes to off-DODIN intrusion sets, we are limited with our authorities, and that's where we're going to work with our partners to help them enable their defense. So when directed, we can support, in this case, DHS with their HERT teams. If they are overwhelmed and a DISCA request comes in, then the Cyber National Mission Force is postured to augment them to do those incident response teams domestically. So those are my opening comments, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you all very much. I would like to start off with a few questions from the table here, and then we'll open it up to the audience at large. For the panel, one of the things that is continually in our minds is that anything that we do within the territorial confines of the United States that we might do overseas is exponentially more difficult because we're doing it within the territorial confines of the United States and among Americans. Now, given the unique authorities for operations within the United States, what are your biggest concerns regarding roles and responsibilities, especially in competition below the level of armed conflict?
Bert, I'm happy to start.
Please, sir.
So I think one of my greater concerns regarding the roles and responsibilities is I look at how well the U.S. military and the Department of Defense generally plan and conduct exercises and test theories and response options. I have greater concern that our interagency partners do not train or exercise to the level that we do. And I think it needs to be done on a more regular, recurring basis. At NORTHCOM, when we undertake training exercises, we try to include as many interagency partners as we can. But I think the training and exercising piece of it for a large portion of our government is probably not where it should be, but it would be conducive to, a more timely, coordinated effort when it comes time to respond and deconflicting response options in the event of any scenario below armed conflict.
Thank you, sir. Others? Ms. Wayman?
I'll go ahead and take a shot. I mean, I think that it is a complex environment. One of the things, though, that I think is we can be optimistic about is that if you think back, say, a decade and a half, to just after 9/11, when we stood up Northcom, we stood up DHS, even within OSD, we stood up the Assistant Secretary for Homeland Defense. We didn't have a lot of, we didn't have an SOP, we didn't have a playbook for operating together with domestic agencies. It was pretty rough, and it took us a while. But if you look at how far we've come in terms of our ability to cooperate, I think last year with the 4 hurricanes that took place was sort of an exceptional demonstration of how well we have evolved our ability, our working relationships between DoD and our domestic partners. So part of it is just working at it. I think one of the keys is we have to recognize that this is just like we recognized a decade and a half ago, that we are going to need to work together to respond for DoD to be able to respond to civil authorities and support them. Now we need to recognize that we have new requirements to work together in order to address the adversaries' intentions potentially within the homeland. So I think we can work through it, but it's going to take time, it's going to take practice, and it's going to take, as Vice Admiral Dumont said, it's going to take a lot of exercises, not just both within DoD, but then also between DoD and our domestic partners.
Thank you, ma'am. Sure.
So I think one of the challenges, again, related to cyber is that we're an open society, and so our adversary knows kind of what our authorities are and our limitations, and they're taking advantage of that as we try to pursue them in cyberspace. So I think one of the challenges we have is when we are pursuing adversaries, we have to weigh off our ability to do pursuit with our ability to make sure we don't become a surveillance state, right? So lots of times I get my young officers asking us, hey, if we change these authorities or these laws, it would be easier for us to do our job. And I go, well, yeah, but those are the types of laws that China and Russia have, and we don't want to become that society. So I think one of our challenges when we think about how we're operating in this domain as an open liberal society, when we're competing in great power competition against these authoritarian countries that don't have the same limitations that we do, we have to take into consideration that. And the reason I say that is every initial cyber intrusion starts out as a law enforcement activity, right? Somebody hacks into your banking account, they've broken the law. And so as a Title X force, we can't really do anything at that level because they broke into law. So the first responders are going to react. And then if it raises to a level of, hey, we see some correlation here and it looks like maybe it's tied to a nation-state intelligence agency, then the MDCO guys can get involved. The counterintelligence folks can get involved because they have another set of authorities. And then if it gets raised up even higher, right, then it's a national security event. Then the folks like Cybercom will be given the authorities to do things domestically. But I think that challenge is that domestically we have rules for very good reasons to make sure that we don't become a surveillance state. And I think as we go forward, at least in cyberspace, those are things that we have to consider.
So I would like to comment on the units that I read off during my opening remarks. And as Gerald Dickinson mentioned, our multi-compo units that we have that are underneath Army North and also his organization. And I think what we need to better in terms of when we're talking about multi-compo units, because when things happen and disasters happen or hurricanes happen and different type of things happen, we don't have time to figure out the access. And the orders for our multi-compo units need to be, our authorities to be able to use them need to be already like preset and ready to drop, and not have to sit there and figure out, okay, is it 12304 Alpha orders? Is it 12304 Bravo orders? Okay, we're going to have to extend them. I mean, these are all gyrations that we shouldn't have to be going through. And I would say that the things that I experienced, I've been in command since July, and what we went through just on Dorian, there's a reason why we have the units that we have assigned to us, but we need that access figured out, and we need it to be better. And so I look at all the things that I will happen in my command as being like the tripwires for everything else that could occur globally, right? And us having to get out of the Homeland to execute a dynamic force employment. And I'm going to be the tripwire here in the Homeland to exercise all of that. And that already occurred during Dorian when we were trying to figure exactly what I mentioned out. And so we're working very hard for our multi-compo units to make that much, much easier, to make it our access day to day for phase 0 type activities, to be able to, that we have the access needed, that we can do the planning that's required to do. And right now that is not where it should be, in my opinion. And so we'll continue to work that, because we absolutely need what we have, and we're going to need it quick, and we don't need to be pole vaulting over trying to figure out orders and authorities and things like that. So I'll stop there.
Just a couple of comments. So, we talked about authorities, and I share some of your views with that. I'm not cyberspace, but I'm space. But if I could for a minute, when 9/11 happened and the growth of the GMD brigade that I talked about and the NCRI ads after 9/11, we really had to look at some of those authorities. And over the course of time, we learned and understood what the threat was, and we learned and understood what the efficiencies were with having very, very short decision chains and authorities that are granted to empower commanders to make decisions in order to ensure that we can protect the homeland. So that's about 15 years ago or so, if you look at the history of the GMD brigade and the NCRI ads. As we look to the future with cyberspace and space, it's a similar in the sense that it's increasing the understanding of what those capabilities are and where we're operating in those domains, along with how do we increase that understanding and exercise it through what Mike was talking about with exercises and having max participation not only within the DoD but the whole of government, because those types of events increase that understanding and the understanding that where the authorities may need to lie in order to make sure that we are responsive to the threat, whether it's a cyber threat, whether it's a space threat, or whether it's a missile defense threat.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm asking this next question if someone would like to, at this point we have 2 microphones in the audience, and we certainly want to make them available to you all. Nevertheless, I'm going to continue because I have the microphone right here. The question I would like to submit now is, multi-domain operations is going to require multiple functional and geographic commands to work together seamlessly to address the threat that we face. We will also have to work with, and sometimes in support of, the Department of Homeland Security to address these challenges within the territorial confines. So my question for the panel is, how can we manage such a complex endeavor in and amongst the rights and privileges of our citizenry?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that. I think we have already begun within the department to improve our ability through the globally integrated exercises to work together across COCOMs, and I think that's a huge step that we've been undertaking for the last couple of years under former Chairman Dunford, and it's very important as we sort of evolve it into the homeland space. So that's one thing that I think we've already got a head start on. Now we just need to evolve it to start talking about how do we do this, including the homeland as part of essentially the contested environment that we're having to balance forces between the various COCOMs. I think secondly, with regard to DHS, we have an opportunity coming up here in 2020 with the DHS national level exercise, which actually should allow us to explore some of these things for the first time. It's going to be the first national level exercise that will not be entirely based on a scenario that is sort of natural disaster related. So I think that's going to give us an opportunity to see how well we are able to integrate between the department and DHS and others. But again, this is new territory for all of us. There's no playbook. We're going to have to develop our capabilities in this area iteratively as we go along.
questions from the audience at this point? Sir, please.
Thank you to the panel for coming out today. I'm Colonel Matt Redding. I'm an instructor at National Defense University. So any good strategy without resources is really just kind of a whim. Having studied some of the DHS budget documents out there where they have $1, the DoD has 10, do any of the panel members have any insight on how the resource landscape over the next 2, 4, 6 years will look in terms of balancing threat and matching it to a line in somebody's budget to ensure that our adversaries can't exploit a seam or gap in our resource base?
Why does everybody always look at OSD? I don't understand. It's not fair. So on resources, yeah, you would have to ask that question, wouldn't you? It's an area that we are going to have to, I'll be honest with you, we have to look at it. It's an area that we are just digging into in terms of the resourcing requirements. And the discussions have begun. The knives are out, and you know, for those of you who have, I'm sure many of you probably have sat in the issue paper review processes in the Pentagon. You know, we're getting after it. There are going to be some hard choices, though, that we're going to have to make potentially, and both within the department and then, of course, as you mentioned, this isn't just a DoD problem; it's bigger than DoD. So I think the key is that we have to be able to tee up those hard choices, and we have to be able to tee up the puts and takes in an accurate way, and in a different way than we have in the past. I mean, we tend to look at the homeland as being an area where you trade off within your space. So if EUCOM wants something more, then EUCOM has to figure out what they're going to give up, or if CENTCOM, well, if CENTCOM wants something more, then everybody else has to figure out what they want to give up. No, I'm just joking. But, yeah, well, sort of. So anyway, one of the challenges, though, is with regard to the homeland, that given that what happens here impacts everyone else, to a certain extent, we may need to sort of look more broadly at how we balance our resource allocation. And it's not just about robbing Homeland's Peter to pay Homeland's Paul. Those are decision matrices that we are going to be responsible for teeing up in the coming year and years as this issue, I think, becomes more prominently recognized.
It's also about understanding the threats, where they're coming from, where they'll be coming from years from now, and making some informed, calculated risk decisions, both within the department and across government with other departments and agencies. But it's critically important to understand where the risk is, what the threat actually is going to be several years out, and then how do you sort of make trade-offs and decisions in that respect. That's the difficult part, I'm afraid, and it's just going to take some real thoughtful, careful analysis to understand where to apply the resources. The other thing is we do need to do a better job of taking advantage of emerging technologies, some which may be considerably cheaper than we're used to spending. So it's just a matter of understanding the threat and making some calculated, informed decisions.
Ma'am, please.
So I'm Jan Hagler. I'm the Deputy G3 for the 81st Readiness Division at Fort Jackson. All of you have spoken about the necessity of coordination and cooperation across a variety of organizations at different levels. So I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on who owns the common operating picture and at what level would that be held?
I think I'll take the first stab at that. I think it depends on what the incident or the atmosphere happens to be, depending on what's going on. You know, a response in the United States that would involve a number of agencies, obviously the National Security Council would play a big role in dictating response and identifying what resources to apply, and then departments and agencies would conduct their authorities and whatnot. So I think it depends on what the scenario is. And I'll give you examples. At NORAD and NORTHCOM, we have liaison personnel from over 24 federal agencies in our headquarters that are responsible for coordinating back and forth between us and those departments and agencies. That has opened up avenues of communication that didn't exist years ago, that have been built upon and added on to, and that allows us within our own sphere of defending the homeland to actually have an understanding of who's doing what within the continental United States. So I think those abilities to, or the ability to have those types of relationships with people who can liaison with the organizations, whether in Washington or the field, is critically important to sort of understanding the operational environment, and that's how we do it from our perspective.
So I would say, again, in the cyber domain, right? So NSA and Cybercom have created the Integrated Cyber Center up at Fort Meade, and we're bringing in similar all the LNOs that are relevant to us for the domestic agencies. The other big one is what DHS runs. They're changing the name, but it used to be called the NCIC, where they have all the kind of like incident response folks that are there, and we're tightly coupled with them. So we have LNOs, they have LNOs at these two sites, and then NCI JTF is kind of like the FBI one, and again, Cybercom has folks down there day to day, so that we can see kind of the information that we want to share between us in cyberspace. And then those, I think, are tied to these larger domestic response, incident response places where we're tracking everything. So that's kind of the manner that we're approaching it. It's not perfect, and we're still working within the interagency to see how we can optimize those types of things.
Before we get too far from the discussion, a number of you have brought up the picture that the former chairman had of us balancing competition and conflict. And at the same time, we've talked several times about the developing technologies overseas. What I'd like for us to ask, to examine for a second here is, what are the current or future technologies that you think that we can exploit to combat challenges to the homeland in that competition phase? And how will that work with the federal or commercial security systems?
All right, so it's always dangerous when you ask a guy from Silicon Valley about technology. So I have a whole laundry list of technology things. So the first thing I'd say, again, in the cyberspace domain is this thing called auto patching. So we already heard from the first speaker that most of these cyber intrusion sets are just because people have terrible cyber hygiene, right? So it's auto patching, and then a mechanism to verify that those actual patches actually took place, right? So that's the first thing I talk about. The other thing is supply chain, to verify that our supply chain is good. And as a guy who used to design ASICs for the agency, that gets all the way down to the lowest level, bit level, of when a piece of hardware is actually made to verify it hadn't been tampered with. And there's a lot of research being done on verifying the sanctity of a supply chain to make sure no interdiction has happened. The two other ones that I'd like to talk about, and I apologize if this is a little bit geeky, I called it quantum proof or quantum safe encryption. So with the advent of quantum computing coming out, and one of our adversaries is probably a little bit more advanced than us, the belief is in the next 5 to 7 years, they can collect all of our encrypted traffic with the encryption algorithms that we have today and probably break it in like 5 to 7 years. So quantum safe or quantum proof encryption means that won't happen, and we'd have to start working on that migration now, and we're waiting for NIST to come up with those standards. And then the third thing, as we move to the cloud and the concept of putting different data sets around there, if you're a good data owner, your data at rest is going to be encrypted, right? In the traditional way that we would do it, we would take all that data, we'd bring it into a big data lake, we'd unencrypt it, and then we'd run our analysis on it in an unencrypted manner. There's something called homomorphic encryption. And the way this works is I have the distributed data lakes, so it stays with the data owner, and the data is actually encrypted. And then when I do my query is actually encrypted. And then it doesn't become unencrypted, it stays encrypted, and it actually does the function of an encrypted query on the encrypted data, and then the response comes back, and it's still encrypted. And then the magic, so there's these guys at MIT that have shown that you can actually do an encrypted data an encrypted query, unencrypted data. The response comes back, and only then when I have those keys to unencrypted do I get that data out. So why is that important? If you want to put PII into the Amazon cloud, it has to stay encrypted. If you do it today, for you to run your query to see like who has smallpox, or not small, who's had their shots, you have to unencrypt that data, and that's when that vulnerability exists. If you use homomorphic encryption, then that data is much more secure with our seamless transactions. So those are the technologies that I'd like to think that we should be looking at as we go forward.
While he comes up and asks that question, just one thing. Isn't this Cyber Awareness Security Month?
It is. It is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We should all be patching your stuff and making sure that...
There you go. See, so I think I understood everything you said. But for us in this room, I think it was our keynote speaker actually mentioned it when he talked about patches and things like that. We can do very rudimentary things, fundamental things right now that will increase our cybersecurity. I don't know how much, but I'm sure it's a lot. And it's just as simple as making sure that you understand every time you log on to, if you're in DoD, you log on to the DoDIN, that you in fact are a cybersecurity warrior. And so I think there are many easy things we can do, like signing and encrypting our emails, making sure that we're not opening up unfamiliar attachments and links that come to us on the emails. But that's not the what'd you call it? What kind of encryption was that?
Homomorphic encryption.
Okay, all right.
Homomorphic encryption. So the reason why patching is important, so there's a thing called Microsoft Patch Tuesday. So they release their patches on Tuesday. So basically they're saying, here are all the vulnerabilities that existed last week that we fixed. And so there are companies that basically weaponize those patches within 2 days. And so if you're not patching your stuff consistently, when Microsoft Patch Tuesday comes out, somebody's going to find a way to get in. And then once they get in, then you know, the way the cyber kill chain works is you do all kinds of things. But initial access becomes very simple when people look at not having a patch system.
Sir, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Hall, the Commander of Joint Task Force Civil Support. I work for General Richardson. My question is for Vice Admiral Dumont and Ms. Whalen. You know, the National Defense Strategy says the Homeland's the #1 priority. After that, it gets a little thin of how we're going to do that. And as someone that served at U.S. European Command and understanding that half of the globe and some of the things we're trying to do there, I understand that a little bit. I know in the future we're going to try to get an OSD CAPE study done on the CBRN response enterprise. Is it the right mix? Is it the right component at the right place? But in the near term, the new commandant has come out and said he wants to do away with CBRN, 525 highly trained Marines, and I would say the gold standard of CBRN response, the gold standard of CBRN response. And obviously he wants to do that because he wants to narrow the Marine Corps' mission and what they're doing. I would tell you as a senior leader in the CBRN response force, that's the absolute wrong direction that we need to go. I just want to know if you've got any thoughts on what are we doing to counter that, and if we're not countering his proposal, is there something that we're going to shift those resources, one, to protect the National Capital Region, because that's the first thing that they do, but from a selfish perspective, and the one IRF that they provide to Joint Task Force Civil Support and the CBRN emergency will be critical to our overall success. So I look forward to your thoughts.
I know the proposal has been certainly raised by the Marine Corps. I know it's under discussion right now because, as you mentioned, it is a critical component that it's a resource that we can't do without. It's not a NORTHCOM decision to make on that. It's really a policy question about where those assets go and what the future holds for those. I know it's under consideration. I know it's being assessed. I don't know what the outcome of that will be.
Yeah, it's actually being actively discussed right now, and from the Homeland Defense perspective in OSD, we would share your concerns about the Marine Corps eliminating that capability, and so we've been in a pretty, I think, good dialogue with them about how we might be able to address their concerns, but also continue to maintain the capability. No decisions as of right now, but it's not a done deal yet that it's going away.
Mr. Anderson.
Neil Anderson, NORAD Northcom. One of the key aspects of this contested environment has been actually the manipulation of data, information, that sort of thing. What can the U.S. government do, but more specifically, is an appropriate role for DOD and the panel members in terms of protecting the American people in that environment, the military itself, and decision makers?
Sir?
Okay, so I guess I'd say that, the manipulation of data and the influence of people are actually two separate things, although one can help lead to the other, right? So our kind of role in DOD is to kind of counter adversary information if it be overseas, and then work with domestic agencies that would operate domestically, right? So our job isn't really to, Americans can say anything they want because it's freedom of speech. But if we can show that the source of that information is from a maligned actor overseas, then we would try to counter that overseas, and then work with domestic agencies to allow that to annotate that data so that they know that it's been manipulated, right? And so then we would also work with domestic agencies to help them from at least a data perspective on trying to help them with data integrity, right? So people want to talk about the elections, the election security. In this case, DHS has the lead with the states. We would try to support them any way we could as the Department of Defense. And then when it comes to the maligned influence, again, referring to the elections, we would take that tack by working with the appropriate domestic agencies that would try to say, hey, is this source of the data or information coming from a maligned nation state? And if we could identify that through our intelligence operations, we would work with the domestic agency to expose that. But I don't think DOD wants to get into the business of any type of censorship. That's not our job. And again, as I said earlier, the challenge is, we have certain rights as Americans, and we want to make sure that we uphold those rights. And I'm sure every panel here will say we are always going to be law-abiding military officers that do operations, and we let the civilian leadership determine the rules and regulations of how we're going to operate. But I think that's one of the key challenges, right? Our society is open, and people can say what they want, and our adversaries are taking advantage of that. And what DOD is trying to do, at least at Cybercom, is in that space, operate overseas to try to contest them there.
I think I'd add that we have to sort of accept that the capability to manipulate data is sort of a reality of the 21st century world that we live in. And I think the Secretary even mentioned or somebody maybe asked a question with regard to the production of deep fakes and all of these tools that can be used to shape an environment. And so that's one of the things that within the department that we need to do is we need to educate our own personnel about this. I mean, they are as subject to being manipulated as the average American citizen, and they are the average American citizen. We are the citizenry. So one of the things that we can do as a department without sort of crossing over the line into space that we don't belong domestically is we can educate our own people because they too will be targets. I don't think there's any question about that. But it also goes back to my earlier comment that we also, as a department, need to make an assumption that we will be operating in a contested environment, and it will be contested in the information space in terms of the integrity of the information that we are dealing with. And so we need to plan accordingly. I think Secretary Rumsfeld, said, if you get your assumptions right, that's where you start, is with your assumptions. And if we're making incorrect assumptions, believing that we are operating in some protective bubble here in the department, then we are going to fail.
If I might, I'd like to go back to what was our first question and some of the responses that came to that to ask a follow-on. We talked about your greatest concerns with regard to role and responsibility and competition below the level of armed conflict, and several of your responses, it had to do with the capability of our partners to exercise and to plan and to execute to the degree that we have grown to expect of our own department. But my question now would be, how is DoD working with federal, state, local, civilian partners, up to and including the private sector, to cooperatively develop exercises and refine the plans that address the realities of continuing military operations, whether we're talking about under attack or in competition or in conflict, by the spectrum of the adversary capabilities that have been our concern this afternoon?
I'll go ahead and start from the NORTHCOM perspective. What we have done is, in our exercise program, we have invited in various other organizations from DHS, Justice Department, and others to help with the planning of the exercise and then conducting the exercises. Additionally, we've also spent a lot of time with industry in various sectors, the IT sector, communications sector, maritime sector, rail, and pipeline sectors, to talk about the risks that they need to be aware of, what U.S. government and DoD responses would be, and to sort of coordinate efforts and think through some various scenarios. And we also invite them to help us in our own planning and our own exercises program, to provide information to us that we hadn't considered. And but we have done this of late to actually a pretty good return on investment.
Thanks, sir.
So at Cybercom, so we have a couple of MOUs that DoD has sponsored with DHS. First one was Pathfinder, to work with the financial sector. And then we're working on one with DOE right now. And generally what we do is, as I use in my contract, DoD defends forward, DHS protects the homeland, and then the sector-specific agency kind of secures the assets with the asset owner, right? So we've done an exercise with DOE called GridX, right, where we're looking at catastrophic power failure, not necessarily because of a conflict, but just, you know, how it happens and what kind of things DoD can do to support in those events, right? Whether it's with incident response or whether it's taking actions if it's attributed to a malicious cyber actor, what we would do for what we call DCORA, defensive cyber operations response actions, what we would do overseas to make that that effect go away. So working through the sector-specific agencies with DHS is kind of the mantra that we do in a support-TED relationship, right? And then when we've done these things where maybe the state has National Guard units doing these types of training in the cyber domain, we would kind of advise and assist and say, hey, this is how we do it on the national level. To do that, to make sure we have interoperability to help these folks. And lots of times industry is there, we're getting the best of the best of breed from how industry does stuff, and they see how we operate, and it also improves our force too.
Thank you, sir.
So I think probably we have a pretty robust exercise schedule actually, and and I'm going through my first round of all the exercises. So we're in Vigilant Shield right now, which is a national level Tier 1 DoD NORTHCOM exercise involving NORAD and NORTHCOM, and so quite a bit going on with that particular exercise, and we'll actually be in the execution phase the end of October. But that's really focused on Homeland Defense. We have Vigilant Guard, which is at the state level and has the disaster. That's a state level disaster exercise, and so that gets to the state level, the local level, and territorial and tribal areas that we need to deal with. Ardent Sentry, that's a NORTHCOM FEMA exercise that we do every year. Vibrant Response, that's where the 3 CBRN headquarters get certified. JTFCS, Task Force 76 and 46. And so I think through those, as you bring in all the partners and all the folks that you need to talk to, I also have the Southwest Border mission underneath me for Title X forces, and so it's all about relationships. It's all about knowing who is who and who does what. And that is so critical, and I'm at like the 90-day point of being in command, and so I've tried really hard to get out and to meet everybody. Very thankful that Hurricane Dorian didn't do more than what it did, and I know that's focused on disaster response, but you know, we could be dealing with a disaster as we're trying to deal with other non-lethal things that are happening in our homeland as we're trying to deploy forces out. And so just meeting all the key players from the state, starting with the governor and then to the TAG and the state EOC and all those personnel that work, all the folks that work in the FEMA Region 4 area. Started in Florida, worked my way to Georgia, then South Carolina, North Carolina, and met all the key stakeholders through that. So there's part of that is just meeting everybody and knowing who does what. Now I will tell you with I like how reading through Constrained Eagle, which is a tabletop exercise that DoD ran, and reading through that AAR about they talk about the I wrote it down. It's the interconnected ecosystem of public and private transportation infrastructure, energy sources, information networks, having trained personnel. And when you just put all of that together, that's just a huge conglomeration of folks that need to know each other, need to know, you need to know who it is, and you need to know how to get a hold of them, because if we're really in the middle exercising something like this, those relationships are really going to matter. But we need to get beyond that, I think. And with the exercise program that we have, we can get pretty far along, but we always need to be looking at how we can make it better. And because things are changing so rapidly with technology and with cyber and those kinds of things, that we're only as relevant as as what we're doing today. So we just got to keep after it and keep making it harder and stress ourselves, just like we do with our units in the Army. We want the training center and their experience that they get there at the training center to be harder than combat, and normally that's been the case. But we want the same thing with our exercise program. We want that to be the hardest thing that we encounter, so that when we actually encounter the real thing, that it's a little bit easier than that. So
I'll just add that from an OSD standpoint, we are working with our other interagency partners. We have a program with DOE right now that we call Defense Critical Electric Infrastructure, in which we work with DOE and then the private sector electric power generation community to help identify critical power generation nodes that are related to DoD's infrastructure and our mission requirements. So that's sort of getting the word out there. Last week, I was up in New York for some UN meetings, and I took the opportunity to make a side trip over to talk to the NYPD. And of course, they're sort of the best in the business when it comes to domestic security, and quite advanced, and probably are more advanced, have a more advanced police force than many small nations have armies. But in any case, they were quite receptive to our discussion with them about the sort of the change in the homeland environment, and acknowledged that they had been focused on the CT problem, and were now beginning themselves to realize that there's something different out there that they need to pay attention to, and so they. Working through, again, DHS is always our partner in all of these external engagements, but we are going to partner through DHS and with them and hopefully other parts of the law enforcement community to get the word out, and also look for opportunities to work with them on these problems. So I think we're taking the right steps. We've got a long way to go, though, because this is still a very, very new area that folks are not educated on.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is probably the best summation of what we could expect to take out of a panel like this one today. We've made great progress, and we've got a long way to go. I would like to ask you all to join with me in thanking the panel for a terrific presentation, and we've The ultimate measure of a really successful presentation is one that ends right on time. So there we are. Thank you very much. Good day.
That was good. All right, well, Teresa, thank you so much.
That was a great opportunity.
Sorry, hopefully you get to